Hello YouTube. Today with this video I am finally bringing back a topic that has deserted the channel for a while now, and that is philosophy. If you started to follow this channel a while back, you know that it was a staple topic, something that I would discuss all the time, but for the past 6 months and more I've stopped. The reason why is because I was struggling to find a format that would be conducive to you guys being able to enjoy while not also becoming a burden on the growth of the channel. And I think that I've finally managed to do that, which is something I'm very happy about because I absolutely love philosophy and I love being able to share this topic with you guys again. So, the way it's going to work is this. I've divided the series in two parts. The first one is the educated barbarian, that is going to be pure philosophy, that will make a comeback soon. And this one is going to be more about general topics that I'm going to be presenting through the lens of fiction. So most of the time through manga and anime, because this is my favorite type of fiction. The reason why I've decided to do this is because it's much easier to discuss philosophy through examples when I have tangible things to discuss it. So a story, for example. And on top of that, it's going to allow me to talk about stories that I love, like Berserk, for today's video. I also find that this is going to make it much more accessible for you guys, because even if, for example, you don't know what Berserk is, I'm going to give enough context and enough scenarios that it's going to help you actually get what I'm trying to get at. All of this for the goal, of course, of promoting your own personal improvement. And that's why I've decided to start this series with a video discussion about individuality, about the learned helplessness that can sometimes arise in society when we lose our individuality. You need to train yourself so as not to become the type of person that can get swallowed by the collective, because if you do, your personality, your goals, and your dreams, all of that will vanish. And the reason why I've selected Berserk in particular to talk about that topic and that philosophy of life is because there is a specific theme in the story that is conducive to it, and that is the bend of the arc. So, if you are lost and you're like, okay, I clicked on the video, I want to become my own man, I want to become the hero of my own story, but I don't know what you're talking about. What the fuck is the bend of the arc? As I said, I'm going to contextualize. Every single part and plot and key element to understand the philosophy will be presented. So even if you don't know the story, you'll be fine. If you do know the story, however, you are in for a treat, because it's going to be a mix of philosophy and Berserk. Some would argue that Berserk is about philosophy to start with, and I would agree. So, to recap, the band of the arc is a band of mercenaries. A band of mercenaries that is made up of main characters, like for example Guts. Guts is the hero of the story. The leader of the band of the arc is Griffith, and there are several main characters that I'm going to be talking about throughout this video, because through their personalities and through their character arcs, I'm going to be able to develop this philosophy of self-development, self-improvement, and individuality. Guts, who is his own man and a mercenary himself, at some point joins this band of mercenaries, the band of the Oak. He joins them because he has no choice. He loses at some point a duel against the leader of the band, and he is forced to join. He does not want to. But once he joins, he naturally starts to attract the attention of other people. Why? Because he has a very strong individuality. So we're going to keep an eye on Guts throughout this discussion, because he is our beacon. He is someone who starts off with a very strong identity, and that identity within the group is an immediate benefit to him because people flock to him immediately. He starts getting responsibilities, as you will in life if you shine. When you shine, people want to be around you, either because they want to become like you or because they want to warm themselves around your fire. This is something that at first is a little bit poorly received by him because he is a lone wolf, but he cannot fight against it. His strength naturally attracts those that lack that very quality. And oftentimes, when we observe groups from a sociological standpoint, that is what a group is. Oftentimes, a group is not made up of equals. It is made up of someone who was strong and who attracted a bunch of people around him because he was strong. That is our first lesson. A strong individuality naturally attracts weaker ones. If you want an analogy that we'll get back to, it is akin to a lamp. A lamp is going to attract insects around it because it is deeply attractive to the insect. What the insect derives from it, we don't know because we are not insects ourselves. But we know exactly what the weak derives from that. The weak flocks to the strong because they get protection from it, they get a sense of belonging because now they have a group of people, they're not alone anymore. And as we all know, weakness hates loneliness. Weakness prefers the comfort of the group because within the group it is least likely to be attacked. But most importantly, it also gains an identity. From the group, it gets an ideal to strive for. Even if the ideal is just to flock around the strong, that is enough in and of itself. Every single person on earth needs a reason to exist, and for some people, this reason is just to be part of the group. However, there is a great risk involved in that. Essentially, the risk that the moth encounters when it flocks to a flame. What could happen if you join a group is that you might end up losing your sense of self. Your sense of self dissolves and is consumed by a newly formed identity, an identity that you help form, and that is the identity of the group. Soon enough, people within the group only start to associate with the group. They themselves, as people and as humans, stop existing. This is highly toxic. It's a terrible way to live your life, and yet millions of people live their life like this. Why? Because it's comfortable and because they don't think. Like moths drawn to a flame, they end up engulfed by it and they don't know any better. If I were to check any lamps around the property, I guarantee you that if I opened it, I would find a bunch of dead bugs. Do the bugs understand what they did to themselves? Did they know they were going to die when they flocked towards the flame? Of course not, but they did it instinctively, and just because they were none the wiser about their future fate does not mean that they were able to actually avoid it. They died nonetheless. So this is also a warning to you, and really a warning to anyone who attempts to join a group. This is the paradox of the group. Those who join it most of the time to make up for lack of identity, but by doing that, they end up hindering themselves because once they're in the group, it becomes extremely hard to develop an identity of their own, since they have one that has replaced it to start with, so there is no need for them to actually put in the work anymore. Issue being, of course, that this is not really their identity. This identity can be taken away from them at any point. And yet, this also, and that's part of the paradox, is the main appeal of the collective, that it is much more comfortable and easy to have a group identity as opposed to an identity of the self, because if it's your own identity, you have to fight for it all the time, you have to protect it from attacks, you have to develop it on your own. If it's a group identity, it's pretty much given to you. It's right there for you to collect. You do not have to put in the work, and on top of that, there is a group around it to protect it from the attacks. So to the weak, again, this is immediately attractive and something that the weak will desire. But what about the strong? What does the strong get in this? Because keep in mind that within this analogy of the lamp, the weak is the insect and the strong is the flame. What does the flame get? Well, the flame gets fuel. These insects that die in the flame fuel the flame. Likewise, in human society, the strong that gathers the weak around him gains followers. He gains people that will push him forward in life. This is incredibly potent because for every follower you gain another human that will become an extension of your will. If you look at a company, for example, that's the way it functions. You have the big boss who has a big dream, and everyone underneath him works for that dream. That guy has the manpower of thousands of employees. Of course, the employees derive some sort of benefit from it, but they surely do not get as many benefits as the boss. So the strong benefits the most from the creation of the group. Also, something very important to keep in mind, if you join a group, to some extent, you are being abused, you are being taken advantage of. Now, none of these things really apply to Guts, because Guts, within the story of Berserk, is not weak. He did not need the protection of anyone, he was absolutely fine on his own. But he also did not join the group to become a leader of men. So we have someone who does not need the group to have an identity because he has a very strong identity, and he also does not like the idea of becoming a leader. This is something that makes him stand out, of course, but also makes him a good case study, since I would argue personally that He is someone who actually benefited greatly from joining a group. He is someone whose identity was too strong. Why was it too strong? Because of necessity. He was living by himself, he was his own man, he became his own man, but he became his own man too early, and he became his own man out of fear because he constantly got mistreated, he got abused, he got hurt, so he had to bulletproof himself. That sadly also made him completely unfit for civil society. He turned into more of a beast than an actual man. This is the danger. You, of course, don't want to become too much of a domesticated animal within the group, but you also don't want to become a beast, because if you do, you will not be able to fulfill your role and your duties as a man. This also leads him naturally to not want to lead, as I said. He repugns to the idea of leading men. He does not want to be responsible for other people because within a psychological inversion, he also wouldn't want other people to be responsible for him. He does not want to burden himself with others. But this is also, in a sense, his weakness. He is completely shut off from any type of emotions. So even the emotions of others and having to actually take care of others is something that he's not willing to do. Personally, I believe that as a man, you want to take care of others. You want to put your strength at the service of others. But he is, for the most part, incapable of doing that. Guts took his individuality too far because it was the only thing that could actually save him in the world of Berserk, because the world of Berserk is a very cruel place. But that didn't make him happy. He was constantly miserable because he was completely unable, to connect with others. And this inability was birthed from trauma, as I said. We'll see that the rest of the cast is the same, but there are different responses. So I'm going to use terms here that are going to be a little bit crude, but this is the truth of the matter. Guts was abused, he was tortured, and he was raped. If you look at Casca, for example, who is a female member of the Band of the Oak, and also a very high-ranking member, she was also almost raped when she was a kid, so that's also trauma. Caucus got beaten almost half to death, and he pretty much thought that his life was going to be over, and he was rescued because Griffith, instead of killing him, took him within his ranks. That is a form of trauma, etc., etc. So we see that the individual predisposition of the person within the group plays a big role with the way they actually respond to the integration into the group. Because as opposed to Guts, who, as I said, rejects the group, is super individualistic and wants nothing to do with others, all of the other members I just cited who are traumatized and who joined the group as a response to the trauma are the exact opposite. There are people who have started to look at the group as their own identity. They look at the Band of the Oak as their family. They have entirely abandoned their individuality to serve a greater goal. And that greater goal is, as I said earlier, the fulfillment of the goal of the leader being, in this case, Griffith. So they started as mercenaries, but I would argue that in terms of psychology, they are closer to a family. Because usually what defines mercenaries is the fact that they are only out for themselves. They only care about themselves and about the money they collect. That is not the case for the Band of the Oak. And so, as Guts joins the band, he discovers something that he never knew before, and that is this bond, this familiarity with other people, not just fighting to live. He has actually found a way to enjoy his life outside of battle and understand that life might be more than just killing other people to survive. There might be more to this thing than just a blind slaughter of other lives. That is a great discovery for him. And if we were to bring it to our personal lives, we do not kill others, thank God. But what we might be is, we might be people who are shut-ins, we might be people who are disconnected from others. Because it might also be that we've been burnt in the past. We have started to resent others. I think that in the group can be found the solace and the understanding of what importance other people hold. You start to really rediscover the importance of being social when you discover a group that actually makes you want to be social. It encourages you to be social. This is a great antidote to a nihilistic outlook on life. Nihilism is not just the belief that your own life doesn't matter. It also is the belief that other people's lives don't matter. And that's exactly what Guts was. He was taking lives because other people's life did not matter, because his life did not matter. So life in itself had no meaning whatsoever. But now that he discovered people that he started to feel towards, he realized that, hey, if their lives have meanings, then maybe my life as well has a meaning. I don't just exist in this life to fight, and that is beautiful. So he starts becoming responsible for the life of others. He starts to develop the duties that are aligned with what it means to be a man, and this is his own journey towards becoming a man, right? He was always the hero of the story, but being a hero is not what he wanted in life. Guts wanted to find what it meant to be a man, what it meant to live. And he started to find that answer when he joined the Band of the Oak. He started to reconsider the value of life altogether. But, and it's a big but, he never fully outsources his identity from that of the group, ever. You will notice in the story that Guts always is standoffish. He does his own thing. He trains by himself. Sometimes he takes walks under the moonlight by himself, meaning that, yes, he enjoys the group, but he is able to exist outside of the group. He has found a good balance. And I think that this balance is essential in social scenarios to have the ability to, yes, join the group, yes, be of use to the group, but also exist outside of the group. And we'll get to see later on that it is that very trait that eventually saves him at the end of the day. For the rest of the crew, however, it is not true, because you get to understand as you read the story and the Golden Age arc, which is the story that focuses on the Band of the Ark, that save for Guts, every other member seems to owe their life to Griffith. All of them seem to believe that their lives without Griffith mean absolutely nothing, and that the only meaning of life is to serve Griffith. So essentially, what Griffith is to them is a god. He is the god of the group. And that is, of course, immediately dangerous, because he is no god. He is just a human. So what happens if the human starts to manipulate the lives of his followers for his own benefit? Well, what happens is what we'll see later. Interestingly enough, however, note that these people in the group know that. They willingly surrender their life to that of Griffith and to his dreams. They are willing to die for him, as are really any type of armies. You are willing to die for something else. It could be a greater good. It could be, in certain cases, an ideal. At the end of the day, it's all the same thing. It's surrendering your own life to something else. Some people call it noble. I would argue that it might be in some cases, as long as you're not being deluded in what you're doing. I believe personally that people in the Band of the Oak are deluded, but it's hard to blame them. Like earlier, I described the lamp and the functioning of the group as a great flame that attracts the weaklings. It's a natural inclination of the human mind to want to gather around with other people, especially if there is a great idea. Look at the amount of crazy ideologies that have millions of followers who are willing to die for them. How is that? Well, it taps into the nature of men. Men want meaning in life. For a man, it is better to have a meaning that is horrible than no meaning at all. In this case, it is exactly what happened. People gathered around Griffith because he gave meaning to their life, and even though this meaning is not in their own benefit, they do not care. Ultimately, this creates a form of verticality, because any group of men creates verticality. We could also call this a form of hierarchy, right? Griffith is at the very top, and the other ones are underneath it. And the question I would ask here, and the question that Judo, one of the members of the Band of the Oak, a high-ranking lieutenant, also asked is, why else would men gather? And that, I think, is a fascinating question, because I've been talking about the group as this bad thing in a sense, but I don't think it could be that a group would be anything else, because a group requires verticality for it to exist, since we have already defined that the group exists solely because people want to actually gather themselves around a strong man. Remove the strong man and there is no group. There is also no verticality. So this is why the idea of a collective based on horizontality, something that I hear sometimes, is a childish dream. It's not possible, because the vector of the group and the creation of the group itself is the strong, is the thing that people strive towards. Why would anyone gather around someone that is just like them, that is their equal? There would be absolutely no point to it. And even if there was a point, because these people managed to find a common benefit in joining, at some point, internal fights would arise naturally, because humans are inherently ambitious. So someone within that group would attempt to raise themselves above the rest of the group and it would naturally create verticality, a verticality that would either be resisted by the rest of the group or accepted, in which case the group would re-enter a form of natural existence. This is key as well. I'm not saying that it's bad for groups to be vertical. I'm not even saying that groups are bad. I'm saying that if you are part of the verticality, it's important to know where you stand within it and also understand what this verticality does to you. What it does to the rest of the band of the arc is that it ends up sapping their ambition and sapping their goals and their dreams because now they serve someone else. Through that serving comes a hierarchy, and as I said, this hierarchy brings peace because it is based on strength. But is peace a good thing? We will see that it might not be the case at all. Now, let's talk a bit about the nature of the leader. This is an interesting question. Does the leader have to be good? No. He also doesn't have to be bad. All of these are moral questions and they do not matter. All of that is also discussed by Judo when he talks to God. He says, hey, we don't know or really care if Griffith is a good or a bad guy. The only thing that makes us flock to him is that he is strong, he is charismatic, and this is really all that we ask of him. This can really be extrapolated to any type of government and to any type of kingship. The king must be one thing and one thing only. He must be strong and he must use that strength so that his men count on him, admire him, look up to him. Again, the nature of the group is vertical. The lower ranking members have to look up to the king. This is what matters. If the men like him on top of that, it's even better, but it's not necessary. So, based on this, we see that the collective, what I've been describing as the group, truly exists in a constant state of hypocrisy. Because for the group to keep existing and to stay stable and to maintain verticality, you have to make sure that the followers keep telling themselves that they follow the leader of their own free will, which ultimately, as we have seen, is not necessarily untrue, but it also is true that while they do follow their own free will is being diluted because they are now serving someone else. So this very free will that they started with is starting slowly but surely to erode. And this is something that they might very well be looking for in the group. What they seek in the group is the very renouncement of that will. This is their nature as weaklings. They can convince themselves that they try to join the group because they looked up to the leader. That is a possibility. But for the group to stay what it is, which is a vertical entity, they must never be able to join the leader. We'll see that this is going to create problems within the story because Guts doesn't follow that. Guts is not a weakling, as we established earlier. He has an identity. So he is the type that is going to want to become like the leader because he cannot stand not being as strong as Griffith. Problem is that if he does get as strong as him, why exactly would he stay within the group? He stayed within the group because he lost to Griffith. If he doesn't actually feel himself inferior to the leader, then he would leave the group. That is the danger of anyone trying to actually challenge the leader. And as for the leader, again, the hypocrisy of the leader is different. The leader has to pretend that he likes his men. He has to keep up the charade of fraternity, even though, as I just explained, he knows full well that not only are his men not his friends, but they are also never to actually be equals to him. Because if they manage to become his equal, then the group stops making sense, because why would you follow someone who is your equal? So he has to treat his men like tools, and he has to make sure that they stay beneath him. That is the equilibrium that is key to maintaining any level of group, of collective, but also of society. The society that you live in is built in the exact same fashion. So ponder the things I just explained, because you fall within one of these two categories, and so the hypocrisy I just described is also your own hypocrisy. Your free will, whether you want to believe it or not, at some point has been hijacked by something else. And the goal of this video is to, one, point out that fact, and to help you restore that free will, because only then will you become your own man, will you become the hero of your own story. The people in the Band of the Ark, however, don't care about that. They don't seem to have noticed. And so they are not the hero of their own stories, because it's the Band of the Ark. It's the story of Griffith. It's the dream of Griffith. They are just accessory to it. And when you are accessory to the life of someone else, and you don't have your own life and your own dreams, you live life in a dreamlike state. In a sense, you float through life. This is a theme that is recurrent throughout Berserk. A lot of men seem to say that with a smile on their face. This is also the appeal of the group. You don't have to take responsibility for what you do anymore, you serve someone else. So, technically, yeah, it's a bad thing because, well, you're just floating through life, but it also means that it's never really your fault and you never have to take decisions. So, it's in a sense a drug-induced state of consciousness that is extremely comfortable, especially if you are weak. One wonders if the moth that flocks towards the flame is not also, in a sense, hypnotized by the flame, so also drugged in a sense itself. This is what happens when another man takes ownership of your existence. Many times when we discuss this very action, we think slavery, we think constraint, someone else imposing their will onto you. Naturally, this should be a bad thing and you should rebel. Yes, that is true, if and only if it is done with violence. But if it is done within the context of the group, you might be the one signing up for that very slavery. You might willingly pass the chains around your neck, and whenever your master will actually pull on the chains, you will happily follow the movement because you have convinced yourself, as I said earlier, through hypocrisy, that you have joined the group out of your own willingness. This is something that we see with the member of the band, and this is why they have started to fall in love with their own slavery because they don't consider it slavery in the first place. But for Guts, this is not the case. For Guts, it's a bit different. Guts is like a wolf that joined a pack of dogs. He has now a family, he has food, and he has comfort for the first time of his life. And for someone who never had these things, never had a family or a dad, it feels, of course, like a happy respite. I cannot blame Guts for that. It's only natural. For once, he can just follow the orders of Griffith. He doesn't have to actually think about anything. He can just be another man in the group. And for someone with such a strong individuality, it was tough to swallow at first. But before Guts knew it, he was starting to get lured and hypnotized and drugged by the same comfort that everyone else in the band was experiencing. This was also due to the fact, as I said, Guts never had a meaning to his life. Another man gave meaning to his life. He became Griffith's dog, and so he was immediately obedient but also thankful to Griffith. But, as I said earlier, this is only temporary because Guts also was strong. So eventually his strength was going to awaken and make him challenge the leader and therefore leave the group. For the other members of the band, however, it is permanent. We'll get to that later. You already know that at some point the band of the Ark explodes. But if it had never ended and if the group had perpetuated forever, one could argue that the members would have never actually left. Take Casca, for example. She would have spent her entire life alongside Griffith, even if she never managed to get what she wanted, which was to actually get him. She wanted him as her man. But if she was able to just remain obedient to him and serve him, she would have been fine spending her entire life wasting away at his side, not being touched once or loved once by the man that she looked at with love in her eyes, and that would have been fine for her. Another trait of Casca, of course, and this is something that is evident with her interaction with Guts, is that she resents him. Whenever he endangers Griffith's dream, whenever he does something that is not obedient towards the leader, she gets upset. This is a trait that you will find times and times again within groups. You, if you are part of the group and go against the leader or against the group identity, will be pointed out as dangerous, and people are going to tell you that you are damaging the common good. You are putting everyone else in harm's way. All of that could be true, it also couldn't be. We don't care about that. What matters is the psychology behind it. Why do these people do it? They do it because they perceive you as a disturbing element within a sea of peace, and they don't like that. So, if this is something that has ever happened to you, keep in mind that this was a good thing. It was a good instinct on your part. You went against the status quo, and so you were singled out as a rebel and an element to be actually deleted. And this tendency to point the finger is nowhere stronger than in Caucus. I made a full video about Caucus, you can find it in the description. Caucus is essentially a doomer. So he gave up on life entirely. And the reason why he gave up on life is because he's not talented, he's not good looking, he's not strong, and he found in Griffith someone that was all of these things. So when he saw that, he told himself, okay, why would I struggle in life attempting to attain all of these traits when I can just follow someone who already has them all? To the point that at a certain degree, Caucus convinced himself that he could never get those things, which, unlike what you might think, made him resentful. He was never content or enlightened by this realization. He was constantly bitter because he was too much of a coward and too much of a weakling to actually fulfill and pursue his dreams. But at the same time, he was not wise or kind enough to not resent the person that had all of the qualities he desired. And this is why he hates Guts. He hates Guts because Guts is independent and because Guts is attempting to become as good as Griffith. And times again, Caucus tells Guts, hey, you will never be as good as Griffith. You will never be as strong. It's impossible. Griffith is special. What is Caucus doing? Caucus is talking to himself. He's repeating to Guts things that he told himself. Why? Because if Guts manages to actually reach Griffith, one, he endangers the group, so he endangers Caucus and his comfort, but two, he also endangers the lies that Caucus told himself. Because if Guts did it, why not Caucus? Eventually you will see that Caucus is going to follow up with another mental gymnastic pirouette, and he's going to say, oh, well, Guts managed to do that because he also was special. This is a trait that I hope you do not possess, this tendency to always find excuses by claiming that people who get the things that you want were special in the first place, so there was no way you would be able to achieve it. All of this is the poison that the group imposed on the members to the point that the members stopped being their own person. And then we have Judo. So Judo is a bit of an enigma because he's good looking, he's talented, he's strong, he's intelligent. He could have been his own man. He had all of the characteristics to be his own man. But this is why I think that this video is so interesting. It's not enough to possess the characteristics. You have to have the willingness. Without the will, the strength is nothing. It's the will that moves one forth in this world. Judo was constantly lacking in will. He, like Caucus, looked at Griffith and saw someone who was better than him, but most importantly, he never felt the fire to try and attain his level, even though I personally think that he could have attained his level. Now, we end up with an interesting panorama of characters to discuss here. In the past, I made a video about nihilism and Nietzsche. You can find the description as well. A video about the black pill. And in this video, I told you that something that immediately struck me in Berserk was that there is a clear distinction between the characters in terms of personalities as related to the two main facets of approaches one can have towards life. And that is optimism and pessimism. I personally preach active pessimism, the act of looking at life for what it is, a cruel place, a dangerous place, but then trying to make it a better place. So you're both a pessimist, but you're also active. I tell people to not be optimistic because optimism is the tendency of looking at life as this great place, this bright yellow sunshine in the sky, and nothing can go wrong. This is dangerous because you're deluding yourself to the nature of reality, and so you will eventually be surprised by it, as we'll get back to eventually. And then there is the active and passive nature. So as I said, the passive nature is to look at things and say, well, things are the way they are. The active nature is the attempt at changing things. So if we look again at the characters, clearly we see that they all fit a category neatly. Guts is an active pessimist. He has went through so much shit that he sees life in dark and white, but he has decided that he wants to fight to find a meaning to life and to make this life a better place. Then we have the passive pessimist, and that is Caucus. Caucus also thinks the exact same way. The only difference with Guts is that he lacks the will to make a difference. He's too much of a coward. So now something that should be a good thing is actually horrible, because if I were to rank these people, you at the top, the active pessimist, would be number one, and the number four, the worst of the worst, is the active pessimist. Then you have someone like Judo. Judo is a passive optimist. He thinks that things are just going to go his way. If he does nothing, he has given up on even trying in the first place. To me, that person is number three. And then you have the active optimist, and the active optimist is Griffith. He's someone who always had everything he wanted. He was born talented and beautiful. Yes, he had hardships in his life, but things always went his way. And so his interaction with the world is always positive. He's in a constant feedback loop of positive interactions, and so he is constantly optimistic towards life. That is number two. Notice that both active archetypes are number one and number two, because being active in life is the most important thing. Being pessimist or an optimist only comes afterward. The reason why I wanted to present these categories is, one, because it's interesting. Let me know in the comments what you are. What type of person are you? But also because it's going to become very relevant later. Because this difference between Guts and the rest of the band is the difference between someone who's going to become their own man and someone who never will. But most importantly, it's also the difference between Guts and Griffith that will define their fate at the end of the day. Now, to get back to the difference between Guts and the rest of the group, of course, this means that Griffith is the sun, he's the active optimist, and all of the other members of the crew depend on him for their identity. So they derive their self-perceived identity from the leader of the group, from Griffith, the only exception being, as I said, of course, Guts. And of course, not being dependent on the group for your identity is a good thing. You never actually want to depend on the group for something that is so personal and intimate. What does this mean, this hierarchy of people and these archetypes and the position of the leader within the group? What does this mean exactly for the group? Well, it's obvious. It means that if the group or the leader fails, then the identity that these people actually get from this person and from the group vanishes as well. So the natural reaction you will see from these people is that whenever they perceive that the group is in danger, they will actually try to prevent its destruction with everything that they have. Is it because they perceive that the group is beneficial to them and to the world? No, it's because they cannot exist as people without the group because their sense of self is now tied to the group entirely. If you are the leader, this is great because you do not need to shackle these people. They shackle themselves. Keep in mind that we're talking about groups here. This also goes for brands, it goes for companies, it goes for governments. If you can get the people that follow you to associate with your brand so much that it becomes the identity, you have them for life. They will clamor for their own slavery and they will actually fight. This is the craziest part. They will fight against people who attempt to free them. Guts, without even knowing, just by existing, is an example of freedom, and the other members of the group could look at it as an example to free themselves. But instead, what they do when they see that freedom is they get mad at him. They try to shut it down because he is a threat to the group, he is a threat to their own identity, and therefore he must be dealt with. And naturally, this also means that by doing so, they prevent themselves from becoming free. It's what I said earlier, it's the paradox of the group. You join the group to get an identity, and soon enough, without you realizing, you start developing a pathology that means that you will never actually develop an identity of your own. And this could actually be solved in a sense if the leader drifts away, right? You could tell me, okay, well, how do you solve that? How do you conjure the curse of the bot identity? One way would be to get rid of the leader. We'll see later that this doesn't even work in the worst cases, but at some point in the story of Berserk, it starts happening because Griffith starts to drift away from the group. He starts to get into more political intrigues, and so he spends less time with them. And you notice the effect immediately. The second Griffith stops being with them, the group immediately panics because they cannot exist without him. But we see that in the case of the Band of the Oak, it's not what ends up happening at all. Actually, it's the exact opposite. Griffith doesn't drift away. He actually gets closer to his men, and he gets closer to his men because of Guts. Because Guts is the only person in the group that Griffith perceives as an equal, because Guts tries to become the equal, and so naturally the only person in the group that Griffith considers a friend is Guts, and vice versa, of course. But because of this, Griffith is starting to become soft, he's starting to open his heart, and we see that a lot in the story where he starts to question himself and he thinks, is my dream even worth it? Should I really be killing all of you guys off on the battlefield just for this silly dream of mine? You could think that this is a good thing and think, oh, well, this is going to reduce verticality and it's going to solve the problems because now it's going to become one of them. We will see later that actually this is the worst possible thing that can happen to a group. You never want verticality to go away because if you do, as I said earlier, the group is going to crumble and the people that depend on the group for the identity is going to crumble as well. And the only person that notices this in the story is Guts. Maybe because he's a pessimist and he's always looking at things with an eye for tragedy, I guess. But when he starts perceiving that, he immediately remarks that this behavior of Griffith is unbecoming of a king, and most importantly, unbecoming of an oak. The nickname of Griffith is the oak. If we think about this symbolism, because symbolism is big in Berserk, Through the lens of Nietzschean philosophy, the ark is the master, he is the Lord, he flies above the sheep, he flies above the crowd, and he must, under no pretense, lower himself to the ground, because if he does, he's going to become a sheep as well. This is what was happening to Griffith. He was starting to become too much of a man. And again, the democratic egalitarian mindset would be to think, well, that's good, it makes a good leader, he's close to his men. No, we only follow those that we perceive to be stronger, that we perceive to be a god. If Griffith loses his godship, not only does he lose himself and his dream, he's also going to lose his rank within the group, and therefore the group will die. And again, as I said, God perceives that. So very interesting on his part that he was able to see that, even though he understands nothing of politics, but instinctively he noticed that this breaking down of the verticality was an enunciating sign of the chaos to come, because hierarchies have their place. They're not just there to oppress the people underneath. They are there because they create a structure and they create order. And this notion of chaos versus order is all over the place, and it's visible in every single page of Berserk, especially within our first meeting with Zod. Now, if you don't know what Zod is, very simple. He's a big-ass dude with big muscles who can turn into a monster. That is his surface level. On a symbolical level, however, Zod is the dragon of chaos. He is the annunciating sign of the end to come. He is the first person that the band meets that they are unable to defeat, and he tells them, hey, and he especially tells Guts, he tells them, listen to my words. When this man's ambition is finally broken, you will all be swallowed up by a sea of blood. These were the words of Zod. Zod, in a sense, was foreshadowing what was going to happen. He told them, look, this thing that you have going on eventually is going to crumble. And when it does, the head and the top of the tower is going to crumble on top of everyone else, and you're all going to suffer for it. This is the destiny of a group that fails. This is the dangerous bicephalic nature of the group. When it is actually périn, when it is actually vibrant and healthy, and it works the way it's supposed to work, it steals people of their identity and it robs people of their dreams and agency. That's when things go right. When things go wrong, it gets really, really wrong. It doesn't just end with people breaking their chains, it ends with them being strangled by them. This is what Zod was trying to tell them. And interestingly, and this is the way I perceive it, Zod, as I said, defeated the entire band by himself. He's a symbol of individuality. He's a symbol of what it means to be your own person. One person defeated an entire army. Does that ring a bell? This should ring a bell to anyone who read Berserk. Who else was said to be able to defeat 100 men? Guts. Guts also shines through his individuality. These characters are reminders for the reader that what matters is your ability to stand on your own, because a single strong man will always defeat 100 weaklings. This is going to become even more relevant as we advance within this video. But that was Zod's message to the band. He was a reminder of their mistake. He was there to tell them, hey, your group is an error to start with. But if you keep going, it's going to become even worse. It's the weakness of horizontality. When there is pure equality and there is no difference between the members of the group, then the group has no reason to exist, so the group shatters. So you have in reality two ways to end a group. If you see a group and you want to end it, you can cut the head. So now that the people around it have nothing to do, they have no identity and no one to guide them through life. Or you can convince the head that he should lower himself to the level of the followers for the greater good, for equality, all of this nonsense, which essentially is going to, again, mark the end of the group. And these things happen within the story. Griffith at several points is almost killed. People attempt to assassinate him. They don't try to kill fucking Pippin because they understand that Pippin doesn't matter. What matters is the head. So again, if you look at the group as an entity, if the only person in the group that matters when it comes to actually ending the group is the leader, doesn't that also mean that the only really relevant part of the group is the leader, and that everyone else in the group is just, in a sense, working for the leader and not benefiting themselves? I think that goes without saying, and it's actually quite obvious. I'm going to say it because I'm such a fucking nerd, and I know that some of you guys are going to appreciate the reference. This should ring a bell if you read Hunter x Hunter, because in Hunter x Hunter there is the Phantom Brigade that is led by Crow Lucifer, and Crow Lucifer has a different ideology altogether. He believes in the power of horizontality because, in line with what I just explained, he understands that if he renounces horizontality for verticality, this would mean that to get rid of the Phantom Brigade, which is a bunch of bandits, a band of bandits, it would just be as easy as killing him. If his head was cut, then the group would die. So what he attempts to do with the spiders, which is the name of the group, is he attempts to make it so that as long as the legs of the spider, the other members, are alive, the group can continue. This, I personally think, is deeply hypocritical, but not in the right way, because I think that Crow was wrong. Crow did not manage to actually achieve horizontality at all. He was still the leader of the group. If he had died, the spider would have vanished. And this is proven by the fact that when he gets kidnapped, what happens? The spider almost vanishes because no one is there to tell them what to do. So they put all of their efforts in actually getting him back, because it's the only way for the group to continue. And we will see that this is the exact same thing that happens here. At some point, something happens to Griffith, and the group, as a single man and as a single entity, decides to get him back, because without him they cannot exist. And this is the, what I call personally, the spiraling nature of the group. As I said earlier, it's bad when it's alive, it's also bad when it dies. It's like a tower that keeps building up, and when it crumbles, it kills everyone that was a part of it. But the nature of the group dictates that more and more people are going to join, so it's going to keep spiraling upwards. The tower is going to become bigger and bigger. The bigger it gets, the more unstable, but it can only become bigger because it must, so that it can fulfill the ambitions of the leader. The leader in this case is Griffith. He's getting more and more men. The group becomes bigger and bigger. And as the group becomes bigger, what happens also is that the group identity becomes bigger. More and more people join. Their own identity starts to dilute itself within this massive group identity. They dilute themselves because the bigger the group, the more hypocritical the group has to be as well. They tell themselves that they're doing that of their own free will, and it turns into a monster that swallows the dreams of everyone included. Everyone except the leader. The leader, as I said, is the only person that benefits. The dream of one becomes the dream of many. Question yourself, in your life right now talking, are you following your own dream, or are you following the dream of someone else? It might very well be that you have stopped following your dream for a long time now, but you have not realized it because you're still chasing something, but it's no longer your dream, it's the dream of another man. So this is the nature of the group. We're getting to a point where we have a clear definition of what the group constitutes. The group is a monster that devours individuality and teaches humans helplessness. It taps into our gregarious nature as beings, and it teaches us, once we join the group, that this is comfortable, this is good for us. We do not need to be our own person, we can rely on the group, but the group in itself doesn't exist. The group is made up of individual members, so we end up in reality becoming the slave masters for our own neighbors. The master of the group himself doesn't even have to do anything, and I would argue that at some point the master of the group becomes a slave himself to the core and the group identity. This is a different topic altogether. I don't want to get into that because it's not relevant to what we're discussing today, but keep that in mind. All of this is caused by the fact that we are social creatures, so naturally we want to be part of something bigger. Look at religion. Religion is still huge because people join since it's a greater meaning than their shitty life. They can follow a god, just like in the story of Griffith and Berserk, and that is normal. Natural, I wouldn't necessarily say, but absolutely normal. When it's not normal, when it stops being normal, is when this natural incline as social creatures starts to get us into situations where our identity starts to dissolve because of the collective. That is not a healthy way to approach togetherness. I know that when you talk about individuality, you often have people who point out the fact that the West, for example, is individualistic and it has ruined us. I would argue that it's because the West is not really individualistic. It's a form of collectivism that is derived from a toxic understanding of what individuality is. Individuality is not I live for myself, only for myself, and I live for pleasure. That in truth is nihilism. True individuality is being able to be your own person, existing by yourself, and then deciding to put that at the service of the group. But if the group starts to rob you of that identity and individuality, then the group itself is toxic because it endangers the most important facet of human life, and that is free will, the freedom to be your own person. This freedom is gone in the bend of the arc. Casca, Caucus, Judo, they all have renounced their individuality for something greater, and therefore they don't really exist. I would argue that these characters only really exist because of Griffith. If you can tell me a few traits of Casca, for example. What is Casca? Casca exists almost entirely through Griffith. So she's not her own person, she can only exist because she's attached to someone else. And that to me is no way to live your life because it is no way to be yourself. The reason why this is so, in a sense, saddening in the story is because, as I said, all of these characters joined the group for a reason. They joined the group because they had unsolved trauma within their hearts and they wanted to solve these traumas, so they joined the group. But again, if we observe these people, none of them actually solved their traumas. They just put a band-aid on it and they swallowed up the comfort of the group so as to forget the traumas. Look at Caucus. Caucus wanted to prove to himself he was worth something. Instead, he follows Griffith and he tells himself, well, that guy is better than you, so just follow him. That will never make him happy and that will never solve his trauma. And the same goes for Judo. None of these individuals are individuals because they are not able to get to the core of the problems that prevent them from taking ownership of their lives. Instead, they have taken another route altogether. The only two, as I said, who still are attempting to do what I said, which is face their own trauma and find their way through life, is Griffith and Guts. They are the only ones with personalities. And this naturally also means that, as I said previously, Guts is not going to stay there for very long. He, more and more throughout the story as an individual, starts to realize that the fire of the bend of the arc that he's been warming himself at is starting to consume himself. He's realizing that if he keeps staying with the band, he's going to become like the rest of them. He's going to become like a dog to Griffith, and he is simply not okay with that. Not because he doesn't want to serve another man, but because if he did that, he would never be able to find a meaning in his life. He would never be able to find something for and by himself. And there is a great scene when you have Guts and Casca who are overlooking the bend of the arc, and they see all of these flames, and it's the flames of individual campfires. And Casca says with a smile, oh look, all of these individual flames together, they all come together to make a great brasero. And you look at Guts, and Guts is looking at this with a very sinister look on his face, and he says, yeah, they're coming together to feed into the great inferno that is Griffith. All of these individual flames that could have actually become great fireworks by themselves, instead they just feed into the light of Griffith. And there is a sinister undertone here. An inferno usually burns. It's sort of the point. What happens to these individual flames? Well, they are the insects flocking towards the flame. It's not going to end well for them. It's only going to end well for the person that consumes them as fuel to push themselves forward. This is why Guts left. He understood that as long as he felt comforted by the presence of others, he would never be able to find himself. That is a bit of an edgy and almost emo way to think about it, but surely you want to be a lone wolf for a bit, at least at some point in your life. You want to be alone in the forest. You want to be alone with your thoughts, because if you're never alone with yourself, you will never know if you can handle being alone. And being comfortable with who you are, with your own thoughts, and becoming your own best friend is a very important part of life as a man. It's a very important aspect of independence. Some people never do that. Some people spend their entire life surrounded with others, and this is not a good thing, because the day others give up on them or they end up alone, they have lost the manuscript and they do not know how to exist by themselves. And this connects back to what I said about this dreamlike state, floating through life. The time that you spend with people feels like a dream. Usually time even goes faster because you're constantly entertained, you're constantly surrounded by people. And so you never have time to stop and to think. For this video, I researched the methods that courts put into place to keep their members and to collect new members. And something very interesting I found is this. They do something that is called love bombardment and social bombardment, which means that they always make sure you're surrounded by people, always with very strenuous activities and no downtime. That way, you don't have time to stop and think, and this erodes your individuality. The group starts to devour you, which is exactly what the court wants. And when I say the court, let's be clear, the court leader, okay? The group in itself is an entity that is made up of the individuals, but there is someone at the top of this. The court leader wants to make sure that you stop thinking of yourself as the person. It wants you becoming an extension of the group, because that way you're there forever, you're there to stay. The band of the Oak followed the same fashion, and in a sense, the members of the band were policing themselves. Guts got out before he could become like one of them. But he's not living forever. In the story, Guts lived to find himself. He could very well have returned. It could have been that if things went properly and healthily, he would have stepped away and then returned. Things don't go that way. Why? Because the court leader doesn't want you to leave. Whenever Guts attempts to step away, the other member of the court, of the Band of the Oak, resists that and say, hey, why are you doing this? They use emotional manipulation. They say, aren't we your family? Why are you doing this? They're doing that because, one, they don't want to lose him as a friend, but also because, I believe personally, that him living reflects poorly on them, because it forces them to reflect on their own condition, thinking, hey, why aren't I living? Why aren't I trying to find myself in the wild like he is doing? But the person that has the strongest reaction to Guts leaving is, of course, Griffith. Griffith doesn't want him to leave. And this is something that you find also in courts. You are not allowed to leave. If you're part of a healthy group, the group should let you step away. It shouldn't even be a question, because you don't belong to the group. The group doesn't own you. You are just an atom that is attached to the group for your benefit or because of social attachments. And if you want to step away for a bit, it should be welcomed. But the fact that the leader of the group doesn't take kindly to people leaving is quite striking. Because if the goal was actually the happiness of the members, like many groups actually claim, it should be no problem for the person to step away. If they don't allow it, it might be because the happiness of the member, of you who's part of the group, is not actually the problem, and is not actually the goal of the group. The goal is the benefit of the leader. And the leader cannot tolerate apostasy. Apostasy is the action of leaving a court. It's the action of questioning the court and of renouncing it. Usually it's used for religion. Many religions do not let you leave. Funny, isn't it? If the religion was true, why wouldn't the members of the religion not allow you to step away if you start to disbelieve? Well, it's because it leaves a bad precedent. If one person can leave without repercussions, other people are going to start to question the faith and the court, and more people are going to leave. So when Guts attempts to leave, Griffith, the leader, tells him, no, you cannot leave. You belong to me. I own you. If you want to leave, you have to prove that you are stronger than me. And so he challenges him to a duel. In a sense, he wages his own dominance, and he also, and this is his mistake, wages the verticality of the group, because if he wins, the verticality is maintained and Guts is restored as a follower. But if he loses, not only does he lose Guts, he also loses his status as a leader, both psychologically for his own sake, but also in the eyes of the members of the group, and so the entire group will vanish. Link back to what I said previously and what Zod told the group, this is foreshadowed as the worst thing that can happen, and it was all caused by the leader of the group, because this is the nature of the collective. The collective members think that they have a destiny of their own, and their action can actually push the group one way or the other. What pushes the group forth is not the members, it's the person that actually controls the members. It's the leader, in this case, Griffith. And so, in a sense, Casca, the female member of the Band of the Oak, was right, because at one point she claimed that Guts was responsible for destroying the band. To his face, she said it. And Guts was shocked by it and thought, well, that can't possibly be true. I just attempted to leave, yeah. But by doing that, he committed the cardinal sin which was to be more dominant than the leader. So essentially, yes, Casca was right. He was responsible for destroying the band, but he should not feel bad about it. I told you earlier. Any group that prevents you from leaving is most likely toxic, because if it weren't toxic, it wouldn't see any problem with you leaving, because most likely you would return out of your own volition, because you would perceive the group as a net positive within your life. If the group resists it, it's because it's bad, in which case you should happily destroy the group. If your decision to leave breaks the group, it's because the group was weak, fragile, had poor verticality, and so it is in your own benefit, but also the benefit of every member of the group, save for the leader, for you to break free and to destroy the group entirely. And this is why, by the way, and this is a tangent, you will hear many people who are against personal growth, against self-improvement, all of that because they perceive that, hey, maybe if you improve, you're not going to want to be around them anymore, or you might figure out that you're better than them and you're not going to want to serve them no more. Never listen to these people. Focus on your personal growth, not to be selfish, but because this is actually the best way to be of use to a healthy group or to destroy a toxic one. Now, to bring it back to your life again, I believe that we all have a Griffith in our life. We all have an entity that is storing our fate or destiny one way or the other, but that in reality is just a roadblock. It's just something that is preventing us from becoming our best self. And whenever we attempt to improve, this thing rears its ugly head, gets in our way, and attempts to demoralize us. If you can locate that thing and destroy it, you are on your path to becoming the hero of your own story. And that is easier said than done, because your Griffith could be your parents, it could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your dear friend. These people might be at face value net positive because it's blood or it's family or people who you love, but if you actually look deeper, you would realize that they are a hindrance. This is why I picked Berserk. Berserk is a very deep and intricate story, one about symbolism and about psychology. If you look at Griffith at face value, most people and the Band of the Oak, the reader becomes the part of the Band of the Oak, thinks, well, at first he looks like a net positive. What a great guy. He loves his men, they follow him, he gives them a purpose. But ultimately you realize that no, he's actually toxic to pretty much everyone. And the only time where it's evident, after of course the thing that happened afterwards, that you know exactly what I'm going to discuss afterwards, is when one member challenges his authority and suddenly you realize, wow, Griffith was not actually a good guy. Griffith was in it for his own interest. Griffith did not care about them, and he never really cared about Guts. All of that even was a lie. He cared about Guts as long as Guts belonged to him. There will eventually be a video about Griffith because he's a narcissist, he's a grandiose narcissist. I want to make a full psychological breakdown of the character. It's not going to be for today. Do not tempt me. Do not tempt me. We have to move on because I want to tell you something very important as well. These Griffiths in our lives are going to want to shame us for getting rid of them. Most of the time, it's going to be a family member, as I said, who is going to make you feel bad for trying to distance yourself from them because you perceive them as toxic. But keep in mind one thing. Just like Guts isn't responsible for Griffith's action after he left, you are not responsible for people's emotional reactions once you decide that you're better off without them. This is not your baggage. It's important because I know too many people who know that they must leave, who know what they must do to improve, but they get roped in because they're too nice and they're too easily manipulated. Once you have located your Griffith, get rid of it and move on. This will be beneficial for you 100% of the time. Of course, it's not beneficial for Griffith because he was no longer the top dog in his own head. That is the most important part. The fact that he lost face in the front of his men is bad, but the worst part is that in his own head, he lost himself. He was always victorious and now he lost and his entire psyche crumbled upon himself. The reason why I want to say it is simple. It's because oftentimes people who describe the nature of the collective as a monster have a tendency to hype up the monster's nature and present it as indestructible. Here, I think that Berserk does a great job at showing that most of the time, these people that we see as leaders and great gods and above everything else and above us are not special, right? They fool us because of their aura or because so many people look up to them. But ultimately, we end up realizing that they were never that special in the first place, And the only thing that made them special is that we believed they were, and they believed they were because we believed they were. But once that vanished, Griffith lost his way. He crumbled entirely. And this is why I told you that it's always better to be an active pessimist as opposed to an active optimist. For the simple reason that if you compare the reaction of Guts as opposed to Griffith, when Guts lost to Griffith, he was fine. He just kept on living and kept on trying to find a meaning to his life. But when Griffith lost to Guts, he lost everything. Everything shattered around him. And it's interesting too because in that moment, Guts leaving doesn't realize what he did because he only perceives the world through his own lens as a pessimist. So he thinks, well, you only tripped on some pebbles, right? You only lost to me. This is, Jesus Christ, there's a fucking coyote at my window. Okay. The dogs are not doing their job properly. Okay, sorry. What was I saying? Yes, sorry. The fucking hell. Yes, so to Guts, it's just Griffith tripping on some pebbles. It shouldn't be that bad. But for an optimist like Griffith, this is the end of the world. And I have a very interesting quote I want to share with you from Schopenhauer, who was also an active pessimist, or rather passive. But he was a pessimist regardless. What Schopenhauer has to say about optimism is this. Optimism is not only a force, but also a pernicious doctrine, for it presents life as a desirable state and man's happiness as its aim and object. Starting from this, everyone then believes he has the most legitimate claim to happiness and enjoyment. If, as usually happens, these do not fall to his lot, he believes that he suffers an injustice, in fact that he misses the whole point of his existence. This is exactly what happens to Griffith, and why optimists, for the most part, crash and burn when things go wrong, because they are constantly soaked in a constant loop of positive reinforcement that whenever something bad happens, they can't handle it and they shatter and burn. So in a sense, this is why I told you that you must observe the leader of the group to understand the silliness of the group in the first place. Not only are the members of the Band of the Oak helpless because they rely on Griffith, but the man they rely upon is helpless himself because the second he loses control, he shatters and he burns. The man that many regarded as a prophet turned out to be a man just like any other, which points to the silliness of his followers. This is an exercise I want you to do. If you have an ideology, a hero, something you look upon, something that you worship, question how silly this is through the silliness of the person you worship, and question yourself, am I actually following a god or a prophet, or am I just following someone that I've convinced myself is special but is actually nothing special at all? This, once you ask this question, raises another important question. Is it really smart for me to relinquish my free will to a man that seemingly is also just as, in a sense, not necessarily goofy, but is just as incapable of handling his own free will as I am myself? Hence, all men struggle and all men shall struggle, and you should never allow another man to burden your struggle for you, because most likely he's not going to be able to do with your life any better than you. In life, always, it is best to be the hero and the captain, even if you fuck up, even if you don't make the right choices, because in truth, no one else can live your life for you. No one else can take the decisions for you. Even someone who is wiser, who knows better, who is older, even that person, even if they make all of the top decisions for your life, it still will not be better than you making all of the worst decisions for your life. I'm not saying that so that you stop listening to people. I'm saying that so that you do not relinquish your free will to another man. The irony of this being, of course, that in the Band of the Oak, essentially what we find is that Griffith was just as lost as them. He had just as many struggles as them, and he was no better than them, and yet they followed him blindly. And even once they realized that, they kept following him blindly, because even though they found out that their leader was helpless, they themselves were even more helpless. And this is why I think that the story of the Band of the Oak is the story of learned helplessness. It's a bunch of adults who always count on the vertical hierarchy and the person at the top to take care of their problems, even though the person at the top clearly has demonstrated that they're not able to do that at all, or even worse, that they make wrong decisions. they can never go back to making their own decisions because they are incapable of fully relying on themselves. This is fiction, but this also happens in real life. Because once you have decided to just completely lose yourself in cognitive dissonance and you've elected someone else as your God, even if that person proves to you times and times again there are no God, you are going to cling to them. Again, find your Griffith. Your Griffith might not even be hiding, he might be in plain sight. You might be the reason why you're not able to get rid of it. It's because you deified the person in your head so much that now getting rid of it looks like blasphemy to you, even though it would actually be the one thing that would better your life. And this is because, as God say, most people are weak, and so they rely on other people's dream to find a meaning in life. This is important to say as well, because the foundation of this constant attempt at outsourcing responsibility is weakness. God says it outright. He doesn't mince his words. It's weakness because if you actually had strength and you were not a coward, you would be able to rely upon yourself, even if it's hard, even if you fail, because it's always best to chase your own dream than to try and find meaning in someone else's dream. If there is one great sin in this existence, it's this. It's to not be yourself. This should be your number one priority in life. Before even questioning yourself about virtue, about how to be a good person, before becoming a good person, try becoming a person in the first place. And to do that, you have to become yourself. You have to find yourself. But many people never do that. And that is the danger of ideology. In this video, I mainly focused on a human, Griffith, as the leader of the group and the source of all of the issues, but it could be replaced. Griffith could just be an idea. For some people, the Griffith is an idea that they keep in their head that is only a downgrade to their own life, but that they're incapable of actually getting rid of because they spend so much time blindly following that ideology or that person that now they're entirely lost. And so paradoxically, when left in the fog and attempting to find their way, they can only look to the light, which is this ideology or this person. Again, refer back to the analogy of the flame and the moth. So you'll naturally keep moving towards that light times and times again when you feel lost, not understanding that the only thing you're doing is you're getting yourself closer to your own doom because you are incapable of self-reliance. Self-reliance would be saying, okay, I don't need that light, I'm going to go into the fog. This is, again, what Guts attempted when he did his journey, and this is what is needed to become your own person. But, as I said, with the Band of the Oak, they have gotten to a point that even when the light, that is Griffith, was completely snuffed out and disappeared and they were lost in the fog, instead of trying to find their way, they attempted to create a new light. They attempted to create a new leader. They immediately attempted to turn Guts into the new leader of the Band of the Oak, and when Griffith was gone, they followed Casca. So you clearly have a group of people who now are incapable of living their own life. And that is the terminal state of domestication. This is what a group can do to you. You can spend so much time within the group that now you become the group in a sense, where it's not just that you derive your identity or meaning in life from the group, you derive life itself from the group. When the group is no longer there, you no longer live. And that to me means that you also are no longer human. You are no longer an individual. You are now just an appendix of the group. You now are constantly waiting to have someone to tell you how to live your life. And sadly, I have noticed in this day and age and in this modern society that we experience on a daily basis, that a lot of people are working towards that. A lot of people are working towards turning you into that, into turning you into a permanent, a perpetual subservient because it benefits them. I, on the other hand, would like you to become the hero of your own story. I would like you to become your own light. And I think that Miura, may he rest in peace, and the story of Berserk itself is the exact same thing. Because if you look at the story of Berserk, right, outside of the battles and the big swords and the demons, Berserk is a story about what happens to people who refuse to become masters of their fate. Times and times again, the story shows you examples of people who refuse to take responsibility, and times again, what happens to them? They die horrible deaths. This is, in a sense, a parable. The story of Berserk is almost like a biblical parable. It's a story with a subtext that is trying to teach you something through fiction. And nothing is a better proof of that than the eclipse. We're finally getting there. The eclipse is the apex of this theme, of this symbolical theme of individuality. Some people look at the eclipse as this ultra-violent, gory thing. They're wrong, entirely wrong. The eclipse is a symbol. This is the natural repercussion of what happens to a group of people that have always refused to take their own responsibility and that have just blindly followed someone else. The natural continuation of their life was this. It was a horrible event that extinguished all of their flames because they refused to become the keepers and the masters of their own fate. So quickly, for people who don't know what the eclipse is, after Guts defeats Griffith, he gets imprisoned, they get him back, but he's incapable of becoming a leader again because he is completely mangled. So they try to elect Guts as the leader. He refuses because he's chasing his own flame. And at some point, Griffith has what is called a beherit, with which he summons demons. So he summons like a fourth dimension in a sense, where the entire band of the Oak gets entirely massacred. This is very important, but I want to present this scene not to discuss the violence because it's not that important, but to tell you that to me, this event, the triggering of the eclipse, occurs strictly because the band of the Oak refused to give up on Griffith. This is, in a sense, the conclusion, and it is the lesson that is being taught here. If they had let go of him and realized, okay, this band of the Oak thing, it was nice for a spell, but now we have to move on, we have to become our own people, this would have never happened, even though they were warned times and times again. This video is also a warning. The life around you keeps warning you. And the story and Miura also asks the following question: what happens to the very same people, these followers, when the object of their ideology shatters, right? What happens when the flame is snuffed out? Clearly, the natural conclusion would be that they should move on, but as I said earlier, they can't. And there's a character in the story called White that is not that important, but at some point, White points to Griffith, who is completely mangled, and he tells them, hey, have you noticed that your toy is broken? And there's so much meaning in this. He's like, hey, have you noticed that your little band thing is completely worthless and based on absolutely nothing? Because the guy that is supposedly your leader can't even move his arms and legs anymore. And that also loops back to the idea that even when he did, the notion of the band was stupid in the first place. But now that Griffith is not even able to walk or to talk, logically, you should stop playing with the toy. You should get away from the toy. But they can't. This is the sublime object of their ideology. They cannot renounce this ideology, and so they cling onto it. Griffith has become the object of their adoration, so when it's broken, instead of moving on, they try to rebuild it with everything that they have. And in doing so, they trigger the eclipse. And this, and I might blow your mind with this, because I never heard anyone say it, but for the people who know what Berserk is, it's going to make sense. This also points to the fact that Griffith is the band of the Oaks Behelit. He is their own egg of the Supreme King. Quickly again, for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, a Behelit is an egg that is actually a living creature that if you make a wish to it, in exchange for the sacrifice of what you want, you love most, the people you love the most, you can get whatever you want in this world. And interestingly enough, also, if you did your research, you will know that Beherit means Satan in the ancient Syriac language. So the ancient language of people from Syria 1,000 years ago from the Aramaic Empire. That is also a different story altogether, but there's a connection here symbolically also. The Behelit is the representation of Satan. You give something, usually your soul, in exchange for something that you desire. But anyone who read up on theology knows that a pact with the devil never goes well. It never goes well to give something in exchange for something else because Satan always finds a way to trick you. One last symbol and then I'm going to leave you alone. Also keep in mind that Griffith himself is, in a sense, a representation of Lucifer. He is he who carries the light, but who, in a sense, betrays and deludes people into thinking that following the light is a good idea, because he actually leads them directly into hell. He leads them directly into the eclipse. For the other traits that link Griffith with the Behelit, we have, of course, the helmet. If you look at the helmet that Griffiths wear, he looks like a Behelit. It's round with the two eyes. And then there's also the mystique. It is said that one who owns a Behelit starts seeing weird things around him. What happens to the band when they start hanging with Griffith? They start seeing Zod, they meet apostles. Horrible things happen to them. Things that are direct warnings from fate itself saying, hey, following that man is a bad idea. Why are you doing this? But they cannot let go of it. The only person that listened to the warning was Guts, and we'll see that he came back because he loved the band, but essentially all of the other people that didn't listen to the warning ended up dying because they were already dead. That's sort of the point. By trading their individuality for a shared identity, by giving Griffith reign over their life, they had already experienced death. They were already walking corpses. So the eclipse was just the natural conclusion of that. Their souls and spirits were dead, and then their bodies were killed as well. And this is why I said earlier that oftentimes the characters claim that life within the band felt like a dream. It didn't feel real. You know why? It's because it wasn't real. The entire Band of the Oak and the entire Golden Age is a dream. It was just them living their life within the dream of someone else, within the dream of Griffith. None of it was actually their benefit. None of it was actually real. And that is the nature of Behelits. They take control of your fate. Once you give what you desire, what you like most to a Behelit, the Behelit is now in complete control of your fate, which again is paradoxical because Griffith himself wasn't master of his fate. He himself owned a Behelit, which links back to the idea that the story tells us from the start that he was not someone who was following because he himself was following someone else. He was following something else. The only thing worth doing in life is following your own path. And this is how you live your own dream. But if you don't, if you live in someone else's dream, guess what? You're not in control at all. It's like a vivid dream, but that is being engineered by someone else. So when the dream turns into nightmare, it shouldn't be a surprise. The eclipse, therefore, as I said, is the natural continuation of a life without agency. The band, at any point throughout the story, wasn't in control of what was happening to them. It's just that when they were following Griffith, it felt good because they liked him. The eclipse is the same thing. The horror of the eclipse is that nothing makes sense, they're not in control, and things happen to them that they cannot change. It is just that it's done during the eclipse in a fashion that is outwardly violent and extremely gore so as to make you understand what is actually happening. Because I know that many readers only realized what I'm talking about and the perverse influence of Griffith on the group when they read The Eclipse, where they're like, oh, now this makes sense. It is only made possible by the fact that, again, during the eclipse, they experienced body death, which makes you realize that their spirit were already long dead before that. But note that in both cases, both the death of the spirit and of the soul was because of Griffith, not through his responsibility, but because people chose to. This is why I say again that Griffith is the Band of the Oak's Behelit. What do I mean by this? I mean that he is the object of their adoration, and it is because they put their own hopes and dreams into him, hoping that through his own actions he would be able to make them come true, that they end up dying. That's what the story is trying to tell us, and that is something that many people don't realize. If you look at what Griffith is, he appears randomly in the life of people, he looks otherworldly, that is very important, and the number one factor that he has and the influence he has on people is that he convinces people to sacrifice their individuality, so the thing that they should hold the dearest, in exchange for something that they desire more. But if you look at the exchange, they summoned the eclipse. He did not summon the eclipse. They did that to themselves. And that is, once you accept this, the eclipse makes a ton more sense, because a ton of events that again looks like just there for shock value are explained through a symbolical reading. So for example, if we go back to the main characters that I described previously on purpose, you will notice that just like when you make a deal with the devil, or when you make a deal with a Behelit, you get what you want. But you might not get it in the way that you wanted. So they traded their individuality for their deepest desires, And they received our deepest desires, but always in a perverse and twisted fashion. Satan, the Behelit, it works in the same way. You will never really get what you want. The only way to get what you want in this life is to work for it by yourself. If you count on someone else, even if you pay them with your soul, they will give you something, but it won't be what you wanted. Caucus, for example, wanted fame and he wanted women. And guess what happened to him? During the eclipse, he dreamed of himself as a knight, and then he dreamt that he saw a beautiful naked woman coming towards him. But when he embraced that naked woman, he realized that it was actually a monster and he got killed. With Casca, it's even worse. Casca wanted Griffith. She wanted him as her man. She wanted to be loved by him. And what happened to her? She got raped. She got raped by Griffith. So she got what she wanted from the person that she wanted it from, but she didn't get it the way that she actually desired, and so it shattered her. Judo is a good example. What did Judo want? He wanted to be with Casca. He was in love with Casca. So he died defending the person that he loves most. In a sense, you could argue that this is not too bad, but he never got to live a life of love with her. He got to live a life of regret, and then he died. The only person who got exactly what they wanted out of the entire thing is Griffith. Isn't that the perfect conclusion to this video? The only person who benefits from the collective and the group is the leader of the group. That should be obvious. Within the eclipse, Griffith gets his wings. He sacrifices everyone else to get his wings. He becomes a god. He was always a god. That's all of the point. His godship finally became materialized, it finally became real, and his dream came true. And this is, as I said, unsurprising, because when you work for another man's dream and it becomes real, that's no surprise, but it also shouldn't surprise you that it comes at the expense of your own dream. Everyone else in the band had to die for his dream to come true. They all knew it, but they deluded themselves, they followed Griffith, and it ended in all of them dying a painful death. And I will give you a very interesting quote by Goethe, who says, "The man who cannot command himself will always be a slave." In this life, it's not a matter of, oh, maybe I can just take it easy and maybe if I don't follow anyone, I'll be fine. No, if you don't follow anyone, you're not following yourself either, so you're still a slave. Keep in mind one thing in this world: if you don't follow your own destiny, someone else is going to make you follow theirs. People are going to use you for their own device and for their own goals. And you might even like it, like the band of the Oak. But the end is always going to be the same, and it's never going to be good for you. So, the man who cannot command fate for himself will always be commanded by fate. And that also links up with Berserk. That is the point of Berserk, as I said earlier. The only characters in Berserk who are able to survive, not even thrive, just survive, are people who are in control of their own fate, at least they attempt to control their own fate, and they constantly fight to keep that individuality going. Proof is in the pudding. The only two people who survived the eclipse are Griffith, who got what he wanted, and Guts. Guts who maintained his individuality, Guts who kept his identity. Casca also survives the eclipse, but she survives it because she loses her mind. Symbolically speaking, she makes it out of this hell because she's not even a person anymore. She's rendered as a husk of a human. Now, she has literally no identity to speak of because she is completely numbskulled, entirely numbskulled. If that is not the proof that the story is trying to tell us something, I don't know what is. But this also verifies for the story, right? If I were to cite you all the characters, which at this point I'm not going to contextualize because you really should just go read Berserk at this point. Every character that cannot stand on their own two legs gets snuffed out and they die. So, strong characters involve Skull Knight, who always fights by himself, Zod, who fights by himself, and even the Apostles are good examples because if you look at Wyatt, Wyatt was dominant and strong when he was his own self. He was within a group where he was the leader, but the second he asked Zod for help, he got killed. The second he renounced his individuality and he relied on the collective, he got killed. Same for the Count, the Slug Count. Dominant, strong. The second he starts to ask the God Hand for help, he dies. Vargas is also a good example. Vargas is the guy that asks Guts for help, who is presented in the story as pathetic. Times and times again, this story, the story of Berserk, tells you what happens to people who refuse to be their own person and who refuse to become the masters of their own fate. This is not an indictment of the collective. The story is not a story that tells you, hey, live for yourself, by yourself, be selfish. It's the complete opposite. Instead, it's just a warning. It's a warning that those that refuse to take the reins of their life will eventually suffer a horrible fate, and that the only antidote to this destiny is individuality, the ability to have your own separate existence, free from the influence of the group, and to contend against fate with your own strength alone, which ties perfectly with what the Skull Knight tells Guts, where he tells him, hey, contend, fight, struggle. This and only this is the sword of he who tries to become master of his fate. And I think that is also a nice conclusion to this video. So, I had a blast, I think you can tell. I hope it was a good experience for you as well. I hope I was clear. I'm going to be making other videos that discuss philosophy, self-improvement, psychology, and I'm going to be linking it to Berserk, I'm going to be linking it to Baki, to other stories, but Berserk is going to be my meat and potatoes because there is so much about this story that is related to these traits, and I think that you are going to greatly benefit as a person. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.